Hello,
hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Bixby Library. My name is Cedar Winslow, and I'm the Bixby's Community Engagement Manager. I'd also like to introduce our wonderful Bixby volunteer, Shay Newton, who's going to be running the Zoom portion of tonight's event, as well as Ron Payne of the Otter Creek Audubon Society, who's responsible for bringing tonight's presentation to the library. The Cabin Fever Lecture Series will return to the Bixby next month. On Thursday, March 20th, we're going to be jetting off to Scotland with Otter Creek Audubon Society volunteer Mike Winslow. Give a little wave. And we're going to be discussing the difficulties of identifying reed warblers. For more information on that and a lot of the other events we have at the Bixby, you can check out the bulletin board in our little vestibule or our events calendar online. Just a quick check. Can the folks in the back hear me okay? Is this volume working? Everybody sounding good? Great. So the closest bathrooms are on either side of the lobby. There's one to the left of the entrance and another in a hallway to the right of the children's room. If you missed it on the way in, take a moment on your way out to put your name on our sign-in sheet, and feel free to leave your thoughts on this program or any other programs you'd like to see at the Bixby on one of our feedback forums, which is over at the sign-in table. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ron Payne of the Otter Creek Audubon Society.
Thank you, Cedar. I love how easy and plug and play this is because she's doing all the work for us there. It's really wonderful. Before we start the presentation, I'd just like to mention that we have our Otter Creek Audubon Society board out on the table in the hallway here, and you can see some of our materials and some information about the things we do in the area. We also have a sign-up sheet, which will get you on our email events list. Some upcoming events, one upcoming event we have is on March 8th at 8 a.m. We have our monthly wildlife walk at Oddview Park in Middlebury. If you'd like to know what we're doing, when we're doing it, sign up on our sheet out there. And so tonight's presenter, I believe this is going to be his 8th time giving a presentation for us. World traveling bird watcher with over 9,000 birds. No, 10 down, 8. 8,000 birds.
My brother did so.
That's right. I mixed him up with his brother. Over 8,000 birds on his life list. And tonight he's going to be telling us about a recent trip to Easter Island. Everybody, please welcome Hank Kaestner.
Thank you, Ron. Is this working now? Okay, that's great. Pleasure to be here again. I think this is my 8th presentation over 10 years, 10th year anniversary. COVID, of course, took a couple presentations away. This is a presentation. This is the first time I've given this, so it's going to be fun for me as well. Also, my wife's sitting there. This past fall, I decided to. Oops. Try it in. Oh, we can do it manually. That's
Yeah, I can sit next to it. I'll play around with it. See if it works well. Oh, there we go.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, everybody. Please stand by.
As I travel around the world, there are different reasons that I go to different places, and last fall I decided I would go to Chile. There are a number of birds that are found along the coast of Chile. Chile is a South American country. It's 2,500 miles north to south. The northern part up here along the Peruvian border is a desert area. The central part of Chile near Santiago is very much like California. It's got a central valley. It's got the vineyards. Lots of wine is produced there. And then, as you probably know, down in the south, Tierra del Fuego in that area of glaciers. So you get quite a lot of diversity of different habitats. The birds I wanted to see were about 20 birds that are found just in this area south of Santiago in an area called the Lake District. From a geographical point of view, it's beautiful. It's got mountains. From a climate point of view, very much like Vermont. I thought I was in Vermont, and as you see some of these slides, you'll say, wow, it's just like being on Lake Champlain. So I was going to be here. These yellow dots are places that I wanted to go on the coming trip. And since I was there, I realized that I'd never been to Easter Island. Easter Island's out in the Pacific Ocean. It's the most isolated human habitation on the planet. It's 2,500 miles off the coast of Chile. It's actually part of that country. It's part of Chile, but out in the middle of nowhere. So I said, well, I'll take one day. I flew out in the afternoon, spent the afternoon there and evening, spent the next morning, and then flew back to Chile and went south to go bird watching there. So quite an interesting trip that I hadn't planned. To get to Easter Island, it's a 5-hour, 2,500-mile jet plane ride. It's a long way out there. Get off the plane. When you arrive in Polynesia, it's actually part of Polynesia, and you get these legs put around your neck. So I put on here that I got laid by Bloody Mary. Some of you get the joke. A lot of people, especially younger people, don't understand the joke at all. So I have to tell them it's actually a movie called South Pacific. Colonel Joseph Cable, if you remember, and Bloody Mary, who's a local person there that really took care of him while he was there. It's very, very well set up for tourists. They get 100,000 tourists there a year. Pretty amazing. Some by boat, some by airplane. This is where I stayed. Very, very clean, very, very nice area. This was the view from my bedroom out, and off in the distance, you can see in the upper right, the reason that I really wanted to go to Easter Island. There are no land birds that are native to Easter Island. They cut down all the trees 500 years ago, and if there were any native birds there, they're all gone. So it's not so much a bird watching place, but I wanted to go there for two reasons. Number one was to see these Maui's, these stone statues. So finally I get there. How many of you remember seeing pictures of these stone statues? You know, Easter Island, okay. Younger audiences, a lot of people never heard of Easter Island. I tell people, oh, I'm doing a presentation on Easter Island. Well, here comes one now. So say, where's Easter Island? What's so special about Easter Island? I've always wanted to go there. So here I am on Easter Island. The most amazing thing about it, when I travel, what I try to do is I learn about the history, the culture, the food, a lot of different things besides just the birds. And in the case of Easter Island, the most interesting thing to me was how the people got, the original settlers, the Polynesians, got to Easter Island. The Polynesians actually started up here in this area near Taiwan. This is Asia, this is Australia, North America. About 2,000 years ago, people left an area near Taiwan Island. If you saw my Taiwan presentation, you could see, hear about that. The people left there and they came over a 1,500-year period all the way out to the eastern part, French Polynesia, and then all the way up to Hawaii, and then all the way down to Easter Island, and then all the way down to New Zealand. These are people in dugout canoes, and very, very primitive people that settled in the Pacific Ocean. Another group of them actually went to Madagascar, off the coast of Madagascar. The people, native people of Madagascar, are Polynesian ancestry. So an incredible migration or peregrination of people that settled on Easter Island. Easter Island is a small speck of land. When the people left for a 2,500-mile journey from French Polynesia to get to Easter Island, they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know Easter Island was there. It's an island that's only 15 miles long, a little speck in the ocean, and these people found it and settled on it about 1200 AD, which is relatively nearby in terms of history. If you look closely at this fellow's face, I'm going to show you his face in another minute, but these are the original Polynesians that arrived there. Easter Island gets its name for the first European person that went there. It's a Dutch guy, and he called it Past Island, which is Dutch for Easter Island. He arrived there on Easter Day in 1722. The Polynesian population there by that time was about 6,000 people. At that point, they pretty much finished colonizing the island. There was not very much food. The population was getting too large for an island. It's only 15 miles long. The soil was mainly volcanic soil. You couldn't grow a lot of crops there. The Europeans came with their disease, like they came into the Western Hemisphere, into the Americas, and the Indian population suffered from that. Then there was a slave trade to Peru, and then smallpox. The population of the Polynesians was down to just 100 people. Today, the population's about 3,000 people. My guide out there was a Polynesian fellow, Mr. Pakarati. I was very lucky. If you look at his face, it looks very similar to the face of the Polynesian fellow. He's the full-blooded Polynesian guy who actually wrote the book on the birds of Easter Island. I was really lucky to have the best bird watcher there to take me out. You can see down at the bottom, it's his name, Pakarati is his name, obviously the Rapa Nui of Easter Island. So very, very lucky. We go out on the boat the first afternoon that I'm there. I've only been on the island for a couple hours. I learned the first Polynesian word, which is shaka. Shaka is a sign that they give you. You see these people going like this. And this actually was first used in Hawaii, and it means, hello, things are going to be good, just sort of a thumbs up kind of a feeling. So I got that feeling from them and learned that word shaka in Polynesian. We wanted to go out to this place this afternoon to Motunui Islet. This is a small chunk of rock that has breeding on it 5 or 6 species of birds that I had never seen before. And these are birds that live out into the ocean, shearwaters, albatrosses, petrels, birds like that, that spend their life on the open ocean, to come back to this little island to breed. So I was very, very lucky to see. The gray noddy was a lifer for me. Another bird there was the brown noddy. This is a bird that's pretty widespread in tropical oceans. You can see that off of southern Florida. It's found all over the world in tropical oceans. But the birds I really wanted to see were the shearwaters. The reason that I have them in checks, you can see the white checks and the black checks. I have a brother who's the #1 ranked bird watcher in the world, and we're very competitive. And the black check birds are birds that he'd seen before, but the white check birds, look at all of them. 5 birds he'd never seen before, and we saw them all. Needless to say, I went back to him immediately and told him how successful I was. This is one of the ones that we saw, the Herald petrel. A lot of these birds look alike, but by having Mr. Pakarati as my guide, we were able to identify these birds. NMP in the bottom means not my photo. Usually it's all my photos, but there were a couple of birds that I didn't get pictures of that I wanted to talk about. So I put NMP there. You'll see that 2 or 3 times in the presentation only. Look at the white belly on this bird. Another closely related bird, the chromatic petrel. Very, very similar, but not so white on the belly, but just small little details like that. So very, very successful. Back that afternoon to the capital city of Rangiroa. The population out there only 20 or 30,000. Again, they get 100,000 people a year visiting there. 70 to 80% of the economy is tourism. People coming out here to see these wonderful stone statues. This is the harbor there. The harbor there is very, very small. You can see some of the statues right there in the harbor. Only small boats can come in and land there. How do they get their supplies? Well, they had to get supplies for their, wait a minute. There it is. They get their supplies by boat. The boats come up and then they get small little dinghies to come in and bring the supplies into the island of Easter Island. Some of the tourists come there not for bird watching or maybe not even for the statues, but for snorkeling. There's a snorkeling outfit there. They were playing pickleball. I've got some friends up in Charlotte that I'm going to give this presentation to that they're very interested in pickleball. Can you imagine you're in one of those isolated places in the world and they're playing pickleball out there? It's pretty neat to see that. I wanted to go to see the museum, but the native people there, the Polynesian people, were having some problems with the mainland government. It's part of Chile, and it's mainly the European people that were running the government there. So they closed down the museum because they weren't very happy with how they were being treated by the people back on the mainland. So I did not get to the museum. This is another Pakarati. This is my guide's sister who was running for a government post out there. As I mentioned, in terms of land birds, there are only 5 or 6 on the island, and they're all imported. All the native birds, if there were any, have been extinct. And this is the Diuca finch that comes from Chile and Argentina, southern South American bird. You recognize the house sparrow. I mean, this is not exciting at all. The Chimango caracara was brought in. It's a raptor, and it's really raised havoc on a lot of the seabirds on that little island that I showed you where they were breeding. You can see the blood on the bill of this. This bird goes out there and feeds on the young birds and the eggs of the native seabirds that are here. So not much fun. One bird that I was happy to see was one called the Chilean tinamou, which is found in Chile, but difficult to see there, but it was introduced out here 50 years ago, so it's a countable bird that you can see on Easter Island. The native people there, as I mentioned, they've only been there for 500 or 600 years, a relatively short period of time. One of the things that they have, one of the most important things that they have is what they call the Birdman competition. Now, being a bird watcher, the Birdman competition, I say, what is that? Birdman competition, and I'll read this to you. So the competition was an annual ceremony where the chiefs of the different tribes, there were several different tribes, competed to obtain the first egg of the sooty terns. The sooty terns came back to the island and laid their eggs. So there was a competition, and you can see up on the top, the chiefs of the different tribes would swim out to this little island that you saw a picture of and wait for the tern to lay the egg. The first egg that was laid, they took it back to the mainland, and then for the next year, they ruled the island. So it was a pretty amazing, very important thing. Another one of the introduced birds, but these were brought by the Polynesians. These birds have been here for 600 years, was the red jungle fowl, or the chicken. And we saw a lot of those running around there. It was interesting because Mr. Pakarati told me a lot about how the native people lived there. And because they had chickens and that was their main source of meat, there weren't any animals on there. They didn't bring pigs, they didn't bring cows, they just brought chickens. But it was very, very important that they protect the chickens from neighboring tribes. So they built these walls, these stone walls, and in the wall was a hole, and inside it was empty. And the chickens at night would be put into this wall and a stone put there so the chickens couldn't come out and somebody couldn't steal them during the night. So again, by being there with a native Polynesian guide, allowed me to learn a lot about it. This is the coast of the island. It's a very, very rugged volcanic coast. It's on one of those plates. If you know anything about geography, the different plates around on the earth and scrape together. And this is one of the areas where they scrape. And the island is basically just 3 volcanoes. So the soil there is very volcanic. This is my favorite place to go, the Ranaraku or Raraku area is where they made these stone heads. And if you look closely, you can see people up here, right here, that are looking back into the quarry where these heads were made. And as you get closer, you can begin to see the heads that were still in the ground. They hadn't been taken out of the ground. And then finally, even closer, you can see the heads that were still there. So very, very interesting to be that close to these monuments, having for 50 years read about these wonderful stone heads, and then to be there with them. You're not allowed to get close to them. So I took this picture to make it look like I was touching them, but you're not allowed actually to get too close to them. But to be there on that island was really, really something. One of the most famous places is this area where they have a whole bunch of them lined up. These stone heads were made to look inland into the territory of the people that were ruling that area. So all these statues are looking in, you can see the water behind. This is a famous area because in 1960, there was an earthquake in Chile, which is just across 2,500 miles away across the Pacific Ocean. And a tsunami came out here and knocked over all these statues. The tsunami was so strong that it knocked over these 10 and 15-ton stone statues. They were all lying over. And only in the last 10 or 15 years have they put them back up so that the tourists could see them. But absolutely an incredible story about this earthquake that happened in Chile. It was on the Richter scale, 9.5. It was the strongest earthquake ever. If you know the Richter scale, it goes 7, 8, 9. It goes exponentially higher each time it goes one number. 9.5 is the highest ever. This tsunami that knocked these statues over killed people in Hawaii, in Japan, and in the Philippines. That's how strong the tsunami went all the way across the Pacific Ocean. So very, very interesting. Today, because of the destruction on the island during that time, you can see the evacuation for tsunami signs all over town. It's sort of like here when a snowstorm comes, no parking because of a snowstorm out there. Here's the way to go in case there's a tsunami. This is the end of the trip, and I gave my thumbs up, which is the OK sign for Americans, and you can see the fellow in the background, the Polynesian, giving me the shaka sign as we had ice cream. I always end a trip or a time like that with an ice cream treat. If you've seen my programs before, you may remember that. Okay, we're going to go to mainland Chile now. I'll spend 4 or 5 days there. Very, very modern country. I went there with this Birds of Chile. There were certain birds that I really wanted to see there. The birds that I wanted to see are called tapaculos. Tapaculos are a family of birds, about 60 birds. 10 of them are sort of strange looking things. And if you see the Hewitt, the chestnut throated, black throated, the Chucal tapaculo and white throated tapaculo, those 4 birds I'd never seen before. And I hadn't seen them before because their range was central southern Chile, right where I was going to be going on my trip. And no place else in the world. These are very, very range restricted birds down in just small areas. And that's where I was going to go to see them. The Tapaculo family also contains another 50 species of birds that look like little black mice. They make winter wrens look really beautiful. They're little black things, and there were 2 or 3 of those that I had never seen. So I wanted to see 4 big Tapaculos and 2 small Tapaculos on the trip. That was the main thing on Chile. Mr. Terran Daniel was my guide, a local guide. When you get a guide, you never know. You're paying money for a guide. You never know he's going to be good or bad. And the first day we go out, we go up on the mountain and we stop at the first place, and he looks up and he says, there's the condor. Condor is flying, Indian condor flying. And I looked and I said, oh, it looks like a blackbird. And he looks again, he says, oh yeah, it's the austral blackbird. It's not the condor. And I said, oh, shoot. What kind of guy is he gonna be? He turned out to be really good, but he really blew it that first morning. I thought this was really bad. Interesting, one of the first birds we saw was the California quail, an introduced species, one of the most common birds that we saw there in that part of Chile. Striped woodpecker was the lifer forming. Then we got into some of these tapaculos. The mustache tapaculo is one that I'd seen before, but I got a very good picture of it the first morning. And the thing about tapaculos is they feed by scraping on the ground. And if you look carefully at its feet, Yes.
Try it?
Yeah.
No?
Oh, there we go.
Huh.
There we go. You can see how big the nails are, how long the feet are. I mean, it's really, really pretty amazing bird.
Gonna just give me
Yeah,
I'll move
okay.
it for you.
So we're gonna go up to a place called Valle Nevado. Valle means valley, Nevado, snowy valley. It's a ski area. Santiago is where we're coming from. And we get up high, you can see we're about 14,000 feet. But if you look closely, on the cliffs are condominiums and hotels. I mean, this is 14,000 feet ski area, and that's where the people stay. Birds that on my list, my target list were birds that I missed elsewhere in the Andes of South America, the black-fronted ground tyrant, and the black-winged ground dove. Not so many birds up there, but just a couple that I wanted to see. The lesser horned owl was a split recently from the horned owl that we have here. It looks very, very similar, but the one in southern South America has now been split out to a different species. So that was a lifer forming. Just a close-up of that bird. And then finally, to get up on top of those condos were, and then one of the first people that I met up there was actually a couple from, just got married, Jewish, a couple from Brooklyn, New York. And they were there. They were the only Americans, the only foreigners that I saw. I mean, it was all local people the whole trip, except for these lovebirds that I call them the Brooklyn lovebirds. They were taking pictures there, up there on the top of the mountain. Other birds there were the rufous-colored sparrow, a very wide-ranging bird from southern Mexico all the way to the southern tip of South America, not a lifer forming. But a new bird was the greater yellowfinch that's found just in northern and central Chile and areas near Argentina. So that was the lifer. And then the Andean condor. The condor is actually the country bird of Chile. I didn't know that until I was researching it today. That's something I learned today. But the national bird, our national bird, of course, the bald eagle, theirs is the Indian condor. Most places in the Andes, if you go to Ecuador or Colombia, you have to go out and they say, okay, well, maybe you can see a condor if you go down this valley and you look up into the hills, you know, and there's one flying over and you don't get very good views. But in this area, they're sitting on the buildings. I mean, they are literally, as you can see in this picture, there's an adult Indian condor sitting on the condos. We must have seen 20 or 25 flying by. Another one flying by. It really was really super. So the easiest place in the world to see the Andean condor is in Chile, where it's a national bird. I'm just taking a minute to tell a story about this place. We're coming down the road, and one of the birds I wanted to see was called the dusky tapaculo. It's one of these little black birds that's down just in this area. And I talked to Danielle, and he says, "Oh, my wife, no, my wife says there's a spot where we can see this, so we're going to go to one spot and hope we'll see this bird there." So as we're driving to the spot, I tell him the story about the lucky stone. Does anybody know what a lucky stone is? Here in Vermont, it's a stone that has a white band around it. So we call it the lucky stone. And my brother Peter and I, we bird watch all over the world, have had wonderful luck with lucky stones. We carry them everywhere we go. As a matter of fact, let me see what I can. We even had one tonight in case something happens. Here's one. Okay, this is a lucky stone. This is a lucky stone that we bird watched with in Peru in 2019. Got that written on the back. So this is a lucky stone. So I'm telling Danielle a story about the lucky stones. He and I were in Brazil last year. A bird called the Rondonia warbling antbird has hardly been seen by anybody. We went to a spot to see it. We spent 2 or 3 hours. Toward the end of the 2 or 3 hours, Peter gives me the lucky stone that he has in his backpack. I'm holding it for a while. I'm rubbing it, and the guide says, "Okay, we got to turn around now." We turned around, and I said, "Wait a minute, there's a bird." And the Rondonia warbling antbird jumps up in the bush right out in the open where we get a good photograph of it, and we got it. So I'm telling that story to Danielle. We're driving to this place to see the dusky tapaculo, and we get to the habitat, and I said, "Oh my goodness, how are we going to find the bird in this habitat?" I get out of the car, and guess what I found right by the car? A lucky stone. I said, "Danielle, I've got the lucky stone." But does that put pressure on the story? I mean, here's the story about how lucky stone is going to help you, and now the pressure's on. We got to find this bird. It took about 5 minutes.
Wow.
The bird not only hops up, it hops up among beautiful yellow flowers, right out almost in the open, so I can get this picture of the dusky tapaculo. But it was a great adventure that we had. Long-tailed meadowlark, just to give you some birds a little bit prettier to look at. Went to a lot of different reserves for just a single bird in each place. This one's called the Beautiful mountain scenes. You can see these just snow-capped mountains to be there. No other tourists there. We were the only people that we saw, the only foreigners there that we saw, except again for that couple from Brooklyn. Be there by myself, just sitting there with the mountains and the birds flying by. White-throated hawk's a pretty unusual bird, a rare bird to see in Chile. I've seen it before, but one flew right by. And then we started going back to the car, and we saw this sign along the road, along the path, and it had a picture of the Magellanic woodpecker. This is the largest woodpecker now in the Western Hemisphere. There's only one larger woodpecker in the world, that's in Southeast Asia, but in the Western Hemisphere now, the ivory-billed woodpecker probably doesn't exist. This is the largest woodpecker, so I saw this picture of it. And then within a couple minutes, one flies right across the trail and sits right up in the tree. But you can see also the big feet that it has to hold on to it. It's just a magnificent bird. It was as close as I am to you. Very, very great views of the Magellanic woodpecker. And then Danielle says to me, "Oh, the black-throated Hewitt, that's the one you want to see. It's nearby because look, this is a hole in the ground where it's dug with those big feet, those big long toenails." And there it was. It came across the path again. Not my photo. I got this off the internet just to show you what this bird looks like. But again, the size of the feet of the Hewitt, the large tapaculo, really amazing. I did get a picture of the tapaculo at that same spot. This is the Magellanic tapaculo. As you can see, these birds are not very much fun to see. There's like little gray mice that run through the undergrowth. It was a lifer. And then another thing that I learned about the Polynesians and settling in the islands of the Pacific, and I learned something interesting about a disease called scurvy. Everybody knows what scurvy is? Okay. I'm going down, and it says this tree here is a sacred tree in the Mapuche, which is the local Indian culture. It's a medicine, popular medicine that's used, the bark and the leaves, for scurvy. I said, "Oh, scurvy, that's interesting. I've heard of scurvy." So I've saw some pictures of it and did some research, and the species name is Dremus winteri. I wonder why it's named winteri. I mean, it's a funny name to have a species name for this bark, for this tree. Scurvy killed 2 million sailors from about the 1500s to the 1800s. That comes off of Wikipedia. That's not my guess. If I would have told you that scurvy killed 100,000 people, you would have said, "Wow, that was a dangerous disease." During the 7-Year War, that the French and Indian War here in Vermont was part of, the British Navy brought in 200,000 people into the Navy during that war, and 150,000 of them died of scurvy. So scurvy was an incredibly dangerous disease. Magellan went around the world, and another interesting thing, went around the world, and 270 people that started out on that trip, only 18 came back at the end of that time period. Most of them died of scurvy. And of course, Magellan didn't get back. He was killed in the Philippines. He was not the first explorer to go around the world. Elcano, who was the second in command of the ship, actually made that trip, and you can say he was the first person to go around the world. But first, Sir Francis Drake was the first English person to go around the world in the late 1500s. And as I was doing some research for this, I read this where well, this doesn't work either. At any rate, if you see this white star, and I'm just going to read this line. In the Magellan Strait, Francis and his men engaged in skirmishes with local indigenous people, becoming the first Europeans to kill indigenous people. That was really nice. During their stay in the strait, the crew members discovered that an infusion made of the bark of the Drinus winteri, that tree that I had seen here in the park, could be used as a remedy against scurvy. So Captain Winter ordered the collection of great amounts of this bark, hence its scientific name. He was the first European to collect the bark, and the species now is named after him. But it ended up saving tens of thousands of lives once they realized that the bark of this tree could keep you from getting scurvy. So sort of an interesting sidelight in that. The Mapuches are still there today. It's probably about 15 or 20% of the Chilean population, especially in this part of Chile. This is a local person. She's got a lot of different herbs and things that she's selling. This was springtime, fall here, but spring in the southern hemisphere. It's fun, it's interesting to see her. There's still a lot of sort of open, not warfare, but problems as out in Easter Island, where the local people closed down the museum because they were having problems back with the mainland. The Indians out there on the mainland are also having problems. And as I went down the road, the interstate highway, and I saw these covered overpasses. And I said to the driver, why are the overpasses covered? It's to keep the Mapuches from driving up over the highway and dropping rocks down on the cars. So we've seen these covered walkways and say, what's that? Pretty amazing. At any rate, just beautiful countryside up on the wire. It's the bird that we saw that first day, the Austral blackbird that the Daniel thought was a California, the Andean condor, but this is not a very pretty bird to see. One of the birds that was interesting is the burrowing parrot, bird found in Argentina and Chile that nests in burrows, sort of like a kingfisher does, or a bank swallow. Lots of them around. It was fun to see them. I have a brother who's a photographer, and my brother Reed says to me each time, he says, "Oh, you just take pictures of birds. What you have to do is get them in the right position." I mean, photography is really artwork. I mean, he's a professional photographer, so he really knows what he's talking about. But the next one will show you my best picture that gets the artwork. These burrowing parrots just happened to take off. And I sent this to my brother Reed, and he says, yes, A+. For competition in the Kaestner family, that was great with this burrowing parrot. Just some of the other habitat in this part of Chile. Black-faced ibis, one of the birds out in the field. Upland geese flying away. White-winged coot. These are not lifers for me, but just fun birds to see, and birds nice to get photographs to share with you folks. Southern lapwing, which is sort of like a killdeer, common open country plover. Little goldfinch-like birds. But up close, you can see why they're called black-chinned whiskins. Very nice birds. Ruffle-scaled plant cutter. And then the last park that we went to is Convivio. Way up in the snow, it was probably 15,000 feet, snowy all around. Wonderful trees, these araucaria trees in the background, very specific to this part of the world. They have an interesting bark, and it's called the monkey puzzle tree, because all the bark pieces, you can cut down the tree and then make a puzzle and put it together to try to get the tree back into shape. So it's a monkey puzzle tree from the sea. And one bird that's found just in that tree, and it's only described to science in the last 20 years, called the Patagonian forest earth creeper. So I got this picture of that guy. And then the last forest area, this area, a park outside of the town, And this was the chestnut-throated Hewitt. We saw a couple of them, but I didn't get a picture except of this dead one that we found on the road. And only to show you the size of the feet. I mean, here's a bird that's been evolved to scratching the ground, and look at the feet that evolved on this bird. Just the size of a small chicken. And then I do some really lousy photography, but this is the tufted tit tyrant, nice little tuft, but no reason I should keep that in this presentation, actually, other than to say it's a tyrant, but who cares? Okay, we're going down to the last town, and the trip is almost over, going down the roads, and we see all these yellow fields. Now, Josie and I were a couple years ago in southern Germany and western Austria. During the springtime, we saw these yellow fields as far as the eye could see. I don't know if some of the rest of you have seen this. And I wasn't sure what it was. And this time I asked Danielle what it was, and he said, oh, it's what we call rapeseed. And then I looked it up, and it's actually canola is the current word for it. And that comes because the Canadians took this rapeseed and started developing it into an oil seed in Canada. They didn't want to call it rapeseed. What kind of name is that? So they called it Canada oil canola. So that's where this name canola came from. It's the third most important oil crop in the world. Palm oil and soy oil and canola oil. It's just very, very pretty in the springtime to see that along the roadsides. Reminded me so much of Europe. Good highways, places to stop and eat, places to, now it's time for really good food. The food there was really, really good and reminded me so much of being in Vermont, as you'll see in a minute. Beautiful volcanoes. The last town that we're in is called Yankee Way, a little town that's right on a lake there. The beautiful Osorno volcano off in the distance, and this is the part that reminded me so much of, you know, Whiteface Mountain on the other side of Lake Champlain, that sort of a thing. It just reminded me of Vermont. It also reminded me of different places in Europe. This is just a close-up out of the plane windows we took off from there for the Osorno volcano. The town itself, very European. I mean, it's like being in southern Germany or something like that. Look at the architecture there. Very, very nice. I was there for the Oktoberfest. So you think you're in Germany. The interesting thing about this is that it says adults 5,000, niños or children are free. And it also goes on to say is that if you wear native or traditional outfit, that you get a free beer. So I assume that if you brought your kids along and they were dressed in the, you know, alpine clothing, that they would get a free beer. So I just couldn't understand that. But there it is, the Osorno volcano, and you think you're maybe in Munich or southern Bavaria, Germany. I thought I was in Vermont because they have creamies there. Look at that. A black and white creamy or a chocolate and vanilla creamy. They call me helado soft, helado being the word for ice cream, soft ice cream. They don't call them creamies, but to find a creamy while I was there was pretty amazing. This was the beach there. A fellow there with some cotton candy. You see all the cotton candy packages. It's not working at any rate. You can see the cotton candy fellows bringing that down. Just a beautiful spring day. People are just getting out after the winter time. A couple different birds around, the black-necked swan, brown-hooded gull, sort of like our laughing gull a little bit. This is the brown-headed gull's breeding. And then the last adventure, Danielle had been talking about his wife who gave us the location for that dusty tapaculo that we saw earlier, but she finally met us the last day of the trip and spent the last day with us. We go out in this boat into an area to look for a bird called the Pincoya storm petrel. If you can see on this, a little dark blue area in sort of the middle left of there, that's the total world range of the Pincoya storm petrel. It's found in one little bay in Chile, nowhere else in the world. It was only described to science, I think, in the last 15 or 20 years. A new bird for the bird lister. My brother Peter hasn't seen it, I might add. Yeah, he's going to Chile this year. He's going to Easter Island this year too. At any rate, so we get in the boat and we go out and we want to see the Pincoya storm petrel. We go up and throw all sorts of food off the boat. Different birds come in. This one comes in and gets close enough to see the lake. This is the pink-footed shearwater. I've seen those off the coast of North America. It's a pretty widespread bird in the oceans of the world. I'd never seen his pink feet. I've never had one close enough that I could see the pink feet. And then finally, black grouse, albatross, all sorts of birds were coming in, but we didn't see the storm petrel. So we turn around and we're on our way back into where we started. And Danae says, there it is, there it is. And sure enough, there's the Pincoya storm petrel flying away from the boat. This is not my photo, again, I have to say that, but it looks like the Ward Wilson storm petrel, even with the yellow in the feet, very, very similar. But yes, at the end of the trip, as I mentioned before, always celebrate with ice cream. I taught them my habit of celebrating with ice creams. They were very, very happy with that. And then a couple of weeks later, I get an email from them, and they've taken over my habit of celebrating with an ice cream. Danielle had taken Danae out for some bird watching. She had seen a couple of birds she'd never seen before. So they went to an ice cream shop, they got their ice creams, and in sort of my memory, they had a celebration with the ice cream. So they said, thanks, Hank, for the ice cream celebration. So that's all, folks. We got 135 species, 32 lifers, lifeless, 8,239 now, so they're still climbing there. They have a younger brother that's over 10,000. I mean, it's stupid even to talk about 8,239. But anyway, it's fun to go bird watching. The things, again, that you learn as you travel, as you come back, you get ready for a presentation like this and try to put it together so people learn something besides just what the birds look like when you travel. That's all, folks. Any questions? Any questions? No questions. Yeah. It's so easy today, and it was so difficult and impossible 30 or 40 years ago when I started out. You can, through different travel companies now, I've got a local guide who's the best e-birder in Costa Rica that's going to take me out at the end of April in Costa Rica. And I went through a couple of websites and tour companies, and here's a local guy that does the guiding, and then you look him up, and he's on, he's on eBird, so you can find out how many birds he's seen, how good he is. Other people recommend him. Bird watching is just so easy now to find a local guide anywhere in the world. You can also go on bird trips with other people, 15 or other 10 or 15 people on a tour. And that's fun too, because you get to socialize with people and talk about the birds afterwards. My trips are very, very specific. It's for a shorter period of time. I don't want to be away from home for 2 or 3 weeks. I want to see specific birds. I want to see those tapaculos. I want to see those 6 shearwaters that were out on Easter Island. I want to see the Pincoya storm petrel. And once you see that, then you can come home and you're satisfied with your trip. But the local guide is really key, but it's so easy now anywhere in the world to find one.
Well, how much bigger was that woodpecker that you showed than the Pelian woodpecker that we see?
Probably about 20% larger,
Oh, okay.
which is about the same size as the ivory-bill woodpecker. It's 40 centimeters, I think it said. But at any rate, bigger than that, 48. It's just a beautiful. First one I saw, I went with a friend of mine from Baltimore. We went to the southern tip of South America in Argentina. We went to a forest, and one of these birds, the Magellanic woodpecker, flies in and sits on a log as close as I am to the projector there, with his red head banging away, and both of us, our batteries have run out on our camera. I was really happy that this guy flew in and I could get a picture of him. Well, thank you all for coming. Have a good evening, and maybe I'll see you next year.